Well, hello and welcome to the CSF monthly podcast for December 2021. I cannot believe that a year has gone by. And so the first thing I have to do in this podcast is wish you the very best of this festive holiday season. Wherever you are in the world, I wish for you a pleasing and relaxing time now and a peaceful and prosperous new year. Well, not much has changed in podcast world because, as you know, my aim is always to keep you up to date with the latest information and data in the field of rheumatology. And today I'm going to review two papers, again with a focus on JAKinibs. Now, the first is by Kevin Winthrop and colleagues and provides data from an integrated analysis evaluating the safety of filgotinib amongst people with rheumatoid arthritis treated for a median of 1.6 and a maximum of 5.6 years. And I'll tell you all about the details in a moment. Just hang in there, be enticed. And the second paper reviews the pivotal trial data published in The Lancet, the use of tofacitinib in patients with polyarticular juvenile idiopathic arthritis. And that's a really exciting development. New oral therapies, particularly relevant for children and adolescents who quite often prefer to avoid injections. So Ruperto and his colleagues assessed the efficacy and safety of tofacitinib versus placebo in patients with polyarticular JIA, and again, results to follow. And as always, you can access detailed summary slides of the papers on cytokinesignaling.com, cytokinesignaling, all one word, .com. Okay, paper one. Well, an integrated safety analysis of filgotinib in patients with moderately to severely active rheumatoid arthritis receiving treatment over a median of 1.6 years. Filgotinib is an oral, preferentially JAK1 inhibitor approved in Europe and Japan for treatment of people with rheumatoid arthritis. In previous clinical trials, from methotrexate naive through the whole spectrum to biologic refractory rheumatoid arthritis, filgotinib has demonstrated improvement in signs and symptoms, physiologic function, radiographic progression, and quality of life. It was generally well tolerated in these previous trials and a similar safety profile to active comparators, namely methotrexate and adalimumab, with data known up to 52 weeks. But this was an integrated analysis evaluating safety of filgotinib across 7 trials, including long-term extensions, among patients with rheumatoid treated for a median of 1.6 and a maximum of 5.6 years. There was attention to adverse events of special interest upon JAK inhibition. The general results, well, an integrated analysis, 7 clinical trials, 777 and 788 patients receiving filgotinib 200 and 100 milligrams, and long-term safety of filgotinib 200 and 100 milligrams in patients with RA exposed for 4,047 and 2,032 patient years respectively. And that's a median of 1.6 and 1.3 years, the maximum of 5.6 and 4.7 years respectively. Now, during the 12-week placebo-controlled period, rates of treatment-emergent adverse events, particularly grade more than or equal to 3, serious, and TEAEs leading to drug discontinuation were comparable for filgotinib and placebo. EAIRs for deaths were 0.6 per 100 patient year for filgotinib 200, filgotinib 100, and placebo. Long-term EAIRs were 0.5 and 0.3 per 100 patient years for filgotinib 200 and filgotinib 100 milligrams. Proportions of patients treated with filgotinib 200 and 100 milligrams who developed infections and serious infections were higher versus placebo. The MACE and VTE that emerged remained stable over time, and long-term EAIRs of all non-malignant squamous carcinoma malignancies for filgotinib 200 and 100 milligrams remained stable over time. So how do we conclude? Well, adverse events of special interest are generally similar between filgotinib 200 milligrams and 100 milligrams. Serious infection risk is likely elevated with filgotinib versus placebo, as is the risk of herpes zoster. Rates of venous thromboembolism were generally low. Malignancy and MACE were low and similar to that reported in population-based studies of RA. Of course, there are some reservations about that kind of comparison, so more data needed. And over a median of 1.6 and a maximum of 5.6 years of exposure, the safety Tolerability of filgotinib 200 milligrams and filgotinib 100 milligrams were similar, with a lower instance of infections with filgotinib 200 milligrams among the long-term as treated data set. Okay, well, turning now to juvenile idiopathic arthritis and potential use of tofacitinib there. I think you're well aware JIA is a heterogeneous group of chronic conditions of unknown cause, with an onset occurring before the age of 16 years. Now, per current recommendations, patients with the most severe forms of polyarticular coarse JIA and systemic JIA are treated with DMARDs. And despite the fairly significant therapeutic advances of the last decade, many patients have an inadequate response to existing therapy. In an international study of more than 9,000 patients with JIA, although 21 to 46% used biologic DMARDs, 33 to 56% had active arthritis at their last visit. So there's clearly unmet need out there. And this is a trial that assessed the efficacy and safety of the oral JAK inhibitor tofacitinib versus placebo in people with polyarticular coarse JIA. What are the key results? Well, the take home is that the clinical trial met its primary endpoint, which was JIA flare rate by week 44 in part 2 in patients with pJIA. That was an intention to treat analysis. You'll be familiar with this trial design. You reduce therapy and you wait for flare upon administration of placebo or active drug. The JIA flare rate was significantly lower with tofacitinib than with placebo. Improvements were seen with tofacitinib versus placebo in secondary endpoints, including JIA-ACR response, JIA-ACR inactive disease rates, JADAS, and change in the functional measure C-HAC disability index. And rates of adverse events and serious adverse events were similar between both treatment groups in part 2 of the study. So conclusions here, well, in this phase 3 trial, tofacitinib resulted in a rapid and sustained clinical improvement in pJIA disease activity with no new potential safety risks identified. And these suggest a favourable benefit-risk balance in patients with pJIA treated with tofacitinib. Well, if you want to look at the publications in detail uploaded this month and to access our other podcasts and resources, please pop over to cytokinesignaling.com. It's a treasure trove of information. And as always, thank you so much for your attention. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Let us know what you think by leaving a review. But most importantly, don't forget to take some time out in this festive holiday period. Pay attention to ourselves, to our families, to our loved ones, and arrive in 2022 with renewed vigor and energy as we continue to combat the rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. Thank you so much.